Good evening all, and welcome. Sleep paralysis can be a truly disturbing experience for anyone who is unfortunate enough to go through it, as we are about to find out. Is it always just in your head though? I'll let you decide after listening to these stories. But before, be sure to subscribe. Leave your comments down below on what you thought, and don't forget the following. We actually have an app out, and you can check it out for free by downloading it in the Google Play Store, a link in the description. Not to mention that subscribing is free, and you should totally do it. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Grab your pillows, and let the darkness take control. I don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but this one really baffles me to this day. It happened a few years back, and I still can't forget it. Most of my friends have had trouble with substance abuse throughout their lives. Just the crowd I hung around with, I guess. Around the time of this story, one of my closest friends was clean off heroin for the longest time they'd ever been. A few months, but still fantastic progress for him, and things were looking great. We were hanging out one day, and he gave me some great news. Since middle school, he and his mum had been fighting for a medical malpractice lawsuit that happened to him when he was younger, and they won. He got something like 10 to 15K out of the deal, so most of what we talked about that day was how he was going to buy something and go to college. I honestly hadn't seen him that happy in years, and it was great. A day or two later, I was sleeping like normal, when all of a sudden I woke up at 1 a.m. in the morning. I felt great. In fact, I felt absolutely euphoric, like I was laying in the sun on the most beautiful summer's day in a puddle of 1,000 puppies. And that was just the first second. The next second, it amplified. Within moments, however, I went from "this is pretty nice" to "oh, something is seriously wrong," before blacking out. All of a sudden, I was walking down the stairs to my friend's basement. It was absolutely destroyed with stuff thrown everywhere, and empty bottles and syringes laying around. He was sitting there waiting for me on the couch, tears in his eyes. He just kept repeating that he was sorry, and he didn't want to hurt anyone. He said the money didn't last him long, and he's back to being his broke-ass self again. That he was sorry for bringing me there, and he just needed to say goodbye to someone before finally saying goodbye to me, and everything faded out in another wave of euphoria. Me being logical to a fault and pretty straightforward, I woke up the next morning thinking, damn, what a weird dream, but not much else. I wrote it down in a dream journal I was doing at the time and completely forgot about it. I ended up going to work and class like normal. Then a few hours later, I received a call from my friend's mum. She called me to break the news that my friend had passed away that night. Overdose. It wasn't until a few months later when another friend of mine, also ex-addict, was trying to console me by telling me how he went out with no pain, and how it was probably the best way to go when things started to get really weird. He started to explain to me what an overdose actually feels like, the overwhelming euphoria, and how it's impossible to explain to someone who's never experienced it, i.e. me. It was then that I realized what he was describing started to sound really familiar. I went to my phone and opened up my dream journal, and started to read the entry for a few months back to him out loud. He said, "Yeah, exactly. Where'd you get that story?" And I told him the whole thing. Both of us were at a loss for words, and I still am. As I said, I don't believe in this stuff, and if someone told me this story, I would say they were high as hell. But it's a memory nonetheless that I will never forget. Usually, I get sleep paralysis during the day, in a nap, if I'm on my back. And usually it's one of four things. An invisible entity trying to choke me and drag me around the room, up to the ceiling especially. 2, an invisible entity trying to assault me. 3, just a general falling or flying sensation. And sometimes it seems like I'm going to go through a wall or the floor, and I've pulled an Ant-Man and went subatomic or some stuff. The 4th kind is where I see people all around, whether they be strangers or friends or my significant other. Like it'll just be me home alone and it'll happen. And I'll just hear the sound of my significant other come home, clear his throat, kick his shoes off and sit in his unbearably squeaky desk chair. Or it'll sound like strangers may be walking in and out, and that they're all around me. But I can't make out what they're actually saying. In any case, one day I'm in the bedroom napping, and sleep paralysis happens. This time it sounds like there's a bunch of people walking back and forth outside the bedroom window, but I can't make out anything of what's being said. I'm trying to move, trying to hear the voices better, trying to just snap the hell out of it, but I'm not having any luck. Then, one male voice comes in clear as a bell and just says, "Poop." That broke the spell and I woke up laughing my ass off at the singular word. 10 out of 10 sleep paralysis experience, would gladly do over again, just for all the other kinds. I am a skeptic in general, and don't buy into the paranormal stuff. But something happened to me in college that I can't quite explain, to the point that I remind myself a few times every year that it actually happened. I was sleeping over at my girlfriend's house, and for a few nights I had been having a very similar nightmare. The fact I was having nightmares at all was odd in itself. I rarely remembered my dreams at that point in my life, but suddenly I was having them all the time. The dreams themselves were terrifying. I don't remember all the details, but I clearly remember the source of my fear. It was very tall and spindly, with thin arms and legs and the head of a dog. It kind of looked like an Egyptian Anubis. I remember that it would sort of dance towards me in my dream with its arms waving wildly above its head, almost like it had one of those air-driven advertisements that they put in front of car lots to get your attention as you drive by. Sounds dumb when I type it out, but it was scary enough that it still fills me with a sense of dread. And we're talking 15 years later here. All of this is explainable. Until one night, I was having the dream again and woke up right around the time I usually did. Only this time I was awoke, not just with residual terror, but also with an overwhelming sense that something was very wrong and that I was in imminent danger. I looked over at my girlfriend, just in time to see her eyes snap open. We look at each other and just know to get out. We flip on the lights, and here's where I begin to double doubt myself and have to constantly remind myself that yes, it did happen, and froze. All around the room are my girlfriend's hats. There's one on the lamp, a few on the floor, one on the exercise bike, one on the desk, and when we went to sleep, they were all in a box. We stood there a moment in shock, all the while inside my head, I just get the feeling that we need to get out, but we don't say a word. We just looked at each other both white as a sheet. We turned and got the hell out of her apartment, not even pausing to putting shoes on, and we didn't sleep over there again. I never had that dream again, and to this day I have no idea what the hell to think about it, but I don't want to forget it either. I lived in an apartment complex for 7 years, middle to high school, and experienced a lot of weird stuff with many witnesses. But the most unnerving was this. I was laying in bed just getting comfortable. I was rolled onto my side facing the wall, when I felt someone sit on the bed behind me. I thought perhaps my mum had come in, and I turned to look, but there was no one. I could still feel the dip in my bed. The door was closed, the light was off. I was totally alone. I was freaked out so much that I rolled back over and stared at the wall, trying to get the courage to reach over and turn the lamp on. Well, suddenly I feel whatever was sitting there lay down and put an arm around me. I felt the pressure of an arm on my side. I felt the dip of weight behind me. I was too scared to move at that point since I didn't want to turn around and see what was there. Eventually I fell asleep. and nothing strange happened the next morning. I used to get sleep paralysis a lot. One night I had a lucid dream. It started out that I was at work and I had super strength. I've had dreams like this before, and usually no one cared that I had superpowers. But this time everyone was admiring me like I was a real hero. I got hurt on the job and had to go see the boss. At first I was talking to the boss and things seemed normal, general questions about the injury and stuff. Then he asked me, "What do you think about the powers I've given you?" And his face looked off somehow, just wrong. At this point I realized I was dreaming, but I couldn't get out of it, or rather I didn't wake up. It just kept going while he started offering me more power if I wanted it. I didn't know how to explain it, but I didn't feel like this was coming from my subconscious. It felt external and sinister. Feeling like my soul was in jeopardy, I grabbed him and threw him through this door that appeared. It was a door to the void. I felt like I'd passed a test, and before I could think too much, the secretary at our work came and stood in the doorway. She started praising me for turning down temptation for power, but she just kept getting more and more seductive. Just like before, I felt this was sinister, and out of nowhere I threw her at the door too. In that moment I snapped awake, breathing heavily, and actually feeling proud of some sort of accomplishment. I felt like I'd passed 2 tests of temptation, and again feeling proud of it I was about to tell my girlfriend who was laying beside me. In that moment, I suddenly became paralyzed, just like sleep paralysis except I was awake when it hit me. My eyes were open, and I was in the same world, but outside I could hear terrible things like screaming as people were being attacked and killed. I could visualize basically our world, but everything about it was violent and terrifying. Meanwhile, while paralyzed, I could feel something horrible flying towards my window to take me away. By this point I was actually crying so hard my girlfriend woke up and started shaking me to snap out of it. As soon as I got out of it I held her crying and told her what happened. The whole experience made me feel like I had been challenged with the temptation of power, then lust, and those who had failed I'd forgotten about the last tool of the devil, so to speak, fear. This all happened the better part of 20 years ago now, and I remember it as clearly as ever. It's worth noting that I have never been a very religious person, and this was the first time I'd ever entertained the idea of being tempted by the devil or whatever, and was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever been through. On a side note, a year later Constantine came out in theaters, and it made me raise an eyebrow at the concept of hell being another dimension similar to Earth. The hell in Constantine was much different than the one I saw in my paralysis, but again, it was the concept that caught my attention in a way that was perhaps more meaningful than most. I'm in Australia, and I was at a karaoke bar late at night with my co-workers. Someone mentioned that a plane had crashed into a building in New York, but everyone in the bar assumed it was a small plane, or weren't that concerned because they were mildly drunk and having fun. But I saw it in my mind, like I was experiencing the perspective of being a passenger on a large plane heading towards a huge building. I felt the deliberate nature of the event. I lost my crap. I said to one coworker, "Thousands of people are dead. This was deliberate. It'll change the world forever." And then I passed out. She took me back to her place. We were both drunk, so we both went to sleep. In the morning, my coworker came into the room I was sleeping in, and she looked like she'd seen a ghost. "You were right. Thousands of people are dead. It was a terrorist attack. How did you know?" And that was the end of the friendship that I had been building between us. I freaked her out too much. I had heaps of dreams about planes exploding in a bright blue sky. Those dreams stopped after that. I've had quite a few dreams that predicted the future or gave me information about something happening in the recent past or present before others knew. I don't believe in God, but it's really hard for me to deny the supernatural. I suppose it's like other things we don't really understand, Perhaps one day science might be able to confirm and explain this sort of thing. About a year ago, I woke up bright-eyed in the middle of the night. I was on my side facing my husband, and the closet on the other side. For a clearer picture, we had taken down the closet doors when we moved in, since we hated bifold doors, and just hung a curtain that always drew aside. We have 2 long hanging baths for clothes all the way across the double closet, one across the top for his, and midway down across for my clothes. When I woke up, I was already staring at a spot about midway. There was this scaly black demon with red eyes perched on my hang bar, while holding with one arm the top bar, where his head reached between 2 jackets. He just sat there staring at me with his mouth open and very slowly started moving and creeping down towards the closet, like he was moving towards my husband. I couldn't do anything except watch with my eyes pounding to my ear. I must have snapped out of it at some point because I blinked and it was gone. I finally could move and got the courage to get up and move over to the closet. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, of course. I didn't want to close the curtains, I guess, because I figured if it came back it would be better to see it moving instead of wondering if something was behind the curtain. It had to be sleep paralysis. No idea why, but it damn freaked me out for a good few nights after that. When I was younger, I used to get sick a lot. Strep throat and ear infections often bring about very high fevers, and they lend themselves to hallucinations. My mother was no stranger to me spinning wild fantasies while lost in these dark reveries. I once told her I ate glass and was absolutely convinced that it was true. So much my mother started to believe me. I was around 11 or 12 on vacation with my family in Hawaii. Naturally, because I'm always the party downer, I developed a terrible ear infection complete with a dangerously high fever. Hallucinations struck at about midnight when I woke up from pain in the ear. I was sleeping on a convertible couch in the front area of this little grass house and saw through the sliding glass door an elderly woman rocking in a chair on the porch. She was shrouded in a dark cloak so that I couldn't see any of her features, but I still knew it was an elderly woman. She slowly stopped rocking and turned to face me directly, and then reached a skeletal hand up to lower the hood of her robes. As the moonlight revealed her features to me, the idea of an elderly visage melted into a bare bone of a skull. Her eye sockets were empty, but I still knew that she was staring at me. I'm not sure how a skull grins, but at that moment she did just that. Then she looked up, collected her scythe, and walked off the porch. I looked out the living room window that my bed was situated under to watch her stand a little ways away, and watch the process of people make their way down the beach. As the party of people drew closer, I saw they were carrying a casket. A little boy was trailing behind the procession looking blue. The casket was set beneath my window by the group of people, and the lid was opened to reveal the same little boy that I'd seen. He was following his own funeral. It was in that fever-riddled moment that I understood I was going to die someday. Thinking about what I saw that night still leaves me with a ball of fear spinning wildly in my abdomen. 17 years later, that memory turned me right back into a terrified little girl. One night I was going to sleep, and all of a sudden I started to sweat profusely. I tried to get up and turn on the AC, but I could not move from my bed. I was confused a bit and scared, and tried to shout for my sister in the next room over, but I couldn't speak either. At this point is where I saw a dark figure in the corner watching me. It felt like years until the silence broke, and it muttered in a distorted voice, "You're not safe." At this point I could hear my heart pounding like it was in my ear. Next thing I knew, the figure moved across the room to the foot of my bed. It stared into my soul, and then I could move. I was soaked in sweat, and that night I did not sleep. To this day I have never had sleep paralysis after that, and I wonder if I am really safe. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I had just gotten home from school. I was so exhausted that I threw my bag aside and plopped into bed. As I drifted off to sleep, it didn't take long for it to become a lucid dream. In the dream, I decided to go for a walk, so it turned into the dreamscape of a mall. The mall would be like the ones that is partially outside. I always loved the holidays, so it was quite festive once I walked in. I turned a corner in the mall and noticed everyone was gone. The mall was empty. As I reached the center of the mall where the Christmas tree was, I noticed a tall figure in the overcoat standing behind the tree as if spying on me. Due to the lighting, I couldn't see his face, but it did seem strange. Right as I focused on him, people started pouring from different stores and other areas as if carrying on about their day. However, one thing was different about them. They were all giving me threatening looks, as if I was the one who didn't belong in my dream. This put me on edge, and I decided to make an exit at the door that led to the street. I looked to the left and to the right, and as I am on the long street in the city, all that can be seen in both directions is streetlights and kids trick-or-treating. It was at this time I figured I would pick a random group of kids and tag along with them. They took me to a haunted house. When we got there, we were faced with a large metal door that opened and closed by itself. It would count a certain number of people and let them in accordingly. I was lucky enough to be the odd number, so the kids left through the door, and then I had to wait for it to reopen alone. As it opened, I walked out, and the children were gone. Even if they were eager to go somewhere, I knew they couldn't have left me that fast. I looked left and right and the streets were empty. I looked to the right and thought it was empty too, until I saw him, the man in the overcoat, and the uneasy feeling began to set in again, as he began to slowly follow me. Growing nervous, I created an alley that led to a grocery store. It was a sudden shift compared to my normal created door that opens elsewhere, but I managed it by closing the alley behind me. I began walking down the aisles when something told me to turn around. That's when I saw him again. As I looked at him, the fluorescent bulbs didn't show every detail, but they showed enough. The man's skin was a light grey as if he were dead. I could see his skin through the trench coat, hugging his ribs and sternum. I could not see his eyes for some reason, but what I did notice was a horrible, elongated grin stretched across his face like the Jack Nicholson Joker. I was so distracted by that grin that I didn't notice he had started approaching me until he was almost in the aisle. In a panic, I began morphing aisles together, leaving a big space enough only so that I could shimmy through. I felt relief. I knew he wouldn't be able to make it through the crevice. As I turned around, I noticed the aisles were being moved back into position as he casually walked towards me. I couldn't believe it. He was following me in my dream and there was nothing I could do. I was trying to calm myself down now, and I thought I needed to wake myself up. I shut my eyes and awoke in my bed. I could tell by the sunlight from the window that I had only slept perhaps an hour or two. The sunlight caused me to squint and blink. But suddenly I was back in the dream, seeing the man was still approaching. I shut my eyes tighter this time and awoke again. That's when I noticed the closet was ajar. I blink again and I'm back. Once more I shut my eyes tighter than I've ever have before and awake. Now I'm in bed, closet wide open. The blanket was very old and had patches that were transparent, even though it was covering my head, and I watched through the material as the black man from my dream emerged from the closet, this time without his trench coat, and I could see the full extent of his torso excluding his face. I was surprised this man was not dust from the look of his exterior. He came out and just stood at the foot of my bed, standing there, and I dared not move at this point, despite the fact I was concealed under the blanket. He began to bend over. I wasn't entirely concerned because even though he was tall, I knew his face couldn't reach me. but then his torso began to stretch out towards me far enough for his mouth to be able to be right where the patch of material lay. I saw his mouth through the covers and nothing else. I had a horrible feeling come over me, telling me whatever I do to not look into his eyes. His mouth began to move slowly, as I heard multiple whispers that I could not make out. Before I could react though, he bent back into shape and returned to the closet. After I woke up, I stared at the closet for what seemed like hours. I've never been able to explain what happened to me that day, and have not been able to lucid dream since. I would like to, but I feel like I need to be prepared to deal with this entity again, in case, if I do it, he will return. Because I don't know how he leaked from my dreams into reality. I used to work a graveyard shift, and before I would get ready for work, I would take a quick hour or two nap. On this particular day, I had a tough time falling asleep, but once I did, I was immediately transported into a dream. During this whole dream, imagine me going through the whole thing with a feeling of utter and complete dread, just a feeling of knowing that I was not supposed to be doing this, or see this place at all. For context, I'm a girl who was 19 at the time, but in the dream I was a boy of around the age of 10, and I was with 4 other boys. One was younger, and my brother, who was about 6, and 3 others were my friends around my age. It was late summer, and about 6 at night. It was just starting to get dark out, and we were walking through this forested area, one that seemed to be right outside a new housing development. I remember hearing a train nearby, and 2 of the older boys who were leading the way were talking about a tunnel that they had found the day before. My little brother and I asked questions while the 3rd boy remained quiet, while we followed the elder 2. We then came to what I can only describe as a concrete slab, with what looked like a sewage drain in the center. But there was no smell of sewage, and the surrounding area was cleared out, trees and bushes cut down and removed. We climbed down into the tunnel, and were brought into a concrete room with a large drain about 3 feet in diameter, in the center of the floor, and a clean metal grate covering it. It was too dark to see if there was anything in there, but I got the feeling that it had to be water. 2 of the walls parallel to one another were blank, while the other 2 had tunnels in them, again about 3 feet in diameter. It was around the same height and size off the ground, and the walls were perfect angles and had no signs of aging, and the grates and floor, save for a few pine needles, were kicked in while climbing down, and spotless. One of the tunnels on the wall had a grate on it, while the other was open. The 2 older boys climbed up and began examining something with a flashlight. It was a rock or gem of some sort. One of them told me to light the lantern we had bought, and I lit it, and handed it to the quiet friend while I helped my brother climb into the open space. Suddenly we heard a humming, like machinery starting up coming from the open tunnel. The 2 boys got excited and started to head down the tunnel. My little brother followed, and I tried to get them to slow down. I glanced at my friend, and he shrugged, handed me the lantern, and hopped up into the tunnel after them. I looked up out of the drain one last time with the feeling of knowing that I would never see the sky again. My knowledge was confirmed when the lid to the drain above me slammed down, next to the loud clang of heavy metal on metal, when I heard the horrified screams of my friends. And then I wake up sobbing. I still for the life of me cannot figure out who the hell I was or where I was. I don't know any names of the people I was with or what happened to us after I woke, but I remember every other detail. Every once in a while, I will try to do some Google searches to see if I can find anything about 5 boys going missing in a forest, and nothing ever comes up. The dream was so vivid, so real, that I can't help but feel that maybe I was somehow projecting into some little boy's mind, and got to watch as he and his friends found something they shouldn't, and perished because of it. It creeps me out to this day, and you can't imagine just how it itches in my mind. Any thoughts and ideas would be tremendously appreciated. Before I moved to the States, I was about 12, and I was having a sleepover with one of my friends. At the time it happened, my parents were getting us something to eat, and my brother was over at his friend's house. We were in the living room talking about close to being dark, when we felt like we were floating, but we weren't. But it felt like we were. Then all of a sudden we heard figures brushing on the window blinds. The windows, where it happened, were across from us, and we actually saw the blinds move a little bit. We went into my room and waited for my parents, but it didn't stop. That night my friend woke up all of a sudden, and she said she felt like someone was staring at her. She said that she saw this tall dark figure by my door, which was closed, but it was now open. She also saw a smaller dark figure standing by me that was staring at my TV. When she told me this next morning, I didn't want to believe it and told her it could have just been a dream. But she gave me a look which was pure fear, and that's rare of her, since she doesn't get scared often. I have to admit that it put me on edge, and that I was afraid of being in my own room at night. But when nothing else happened, I just brushed it off. I still wonder if she really saw something, or if it was just, sleep paralysis. I work for a place that sometimes asks me to fly down to Laredo, Texas for some work assignments. I love to travel, so I always agree to go. The company always books me a room at La Posada Hotel, a very old and famous hotel. I've stayed here countless times and I've never had any issue or problems, and for the most part my stays at this hotel are always uneventful. However, one night I experienced something that I will never forget, and I sometimes think about every now and then. It was after a long day at work. I got back to my hotel room and quickly fell asleep. Nothing strange, but in the middle of the night I started to have a very disturbing dream. In this dream I was standing in a room, and someone's arms were wrapped around my chest area. I didn't know whose arms were wrapped around me at first, nor did I really care, but what got my attention quickly was that this individual was starting to essentially dry hump me from behind. This is one of the reasons I've never told anyone this. When the individual started to essentially assault me from behind, I immediately turned around to see who was there and yell at them to stop. To my dismay, the person I saw in my dream was my younger brother. I'm a guy, by the way, and was obviously shocked and sickened to see this, so I immediately woke up. When I did, I would find myself lying on my stomach in bed, with my face looking towards the nightstand. The first thing I saw was the alarm clock, 3:08 a.m. I then noticed that I was in a state of sleep paralysis. I couldn't move my body at all, and I could move my eyes. The best way to describe this state of sleep paralysis was that it felt like there was a heavy blanket of gravity keeping me down and motionless. All I could see were the bright red numbers of the alarm clock as the room was pitch dark. Then I realized something chilling. The humping sensation I had originally felt in my dream, and what was the cause of me to wake up, did not stop. It was an aggressive feeling, and I just felt my backside being pushed down. I don't know why, but to be honest, I wasn't as scared as much as I was confused. It was like my mind was still trying to process everything going on. I had just woken up from a dream where my younger brother was assaulting me, and after waking up I found myself in sleep paralysis with the humping sensation persisting. All I remember doing was closing my eyes, opening them again, and hoping it was still possible I was dreaming. But it wouldn't stop. It felt like something was on top of me, preventing me from moving, and that this thing was assaulting me as well. I remember that I then put all of my focus on my hand. All I wanted to do was move it. I felt that if I could move my hand, I would slap out of it. While opening and closing my eyes, I would focus on my hand and do everything possible to move it. And after what felt like an eternity, I was finally able to gain control and move. I opened my eyes and saw that only about a minute had passed on the alarm clock. I sat up on the bed and turned on the lamp on the nightstand. That is when the fear of what had just happened to me hit me. I thought to myself, what the hell was that? I don't remember going back to sleep that night. I stayed in that same room for the rest of the trip, and have since made multiple trips to the same hotel and nothing eventful has happened since. I didn't tell anyone what happened due to the fact I barely believed myself, and it was a bit embarrassing to be honest. I'm someone who tries to look for the logical explanation of things. The logical side of me tells me that it was just a big dream all in my head. However, there is something else that tells me it wasn't. I know what I felt. It felt like something was assaulting me that night. I don't necessarily believe in spirits or entities, but it's an experience like this that causes me to pause and just think a little. I hope you understand why the story is both embarrassing and scary. If I can go out on a limb here and entertain the idea that spirits and entities are real, then could it be that I was essentially assaulted by one of them? What gets me though was that it first started in a dream. I don't understand how it could have been incorporated into it. I feel like that is what happened to me, except it wasn't a sound but a feeling. Could it truly be that I was assaulted by something in the middle of the night, and that it manifested in my dream? I know you won't have the answers, but I would love to hear your listeners' thoughts on this bizarre event. When I was 12, I was sitting outside under a tree. The Arizona heat must have put me to sleep because during this sleep I had the most vivid dream. I knew it was only a dream. It had to be, because I remembered waking up utterly petrified. It wouldn't be until 4 years later that this dream I had would become a reality. Throughout those 4 years, my grandma, who I loved dearly and who had raised me, would be in and out of the hospital due to her diabetes and dialysis. Each time, it was the same hospital. God knows I hated that hospital. I would always know when we were there as soon as I could see that big oversized hammer and that ugly mouse sculpture that we were there. On this day though, I was already in her hospital room and sitting in a chair next to her. Then all of a sudden, across from my grandma's bed, I saw this young girl. She was laying in a bed staring right at me. Only her face looked disfigured and she was laughing wickedly. I kept staring at her, hearing this scary-ass laugh. Then I see her mum is there too, standing right beside her. And now she's laughing at me too, both of them laughing hysterically. I get up from my chair and start screaming, "She's a witch!" and pointing. My finger at them both, I keep on yelling. Grandma doesn't move. It's like she couldn't hear, or maybe she was asleep, I don't know. I'm so scared alone and don't know what's happening. My mum comes running in after hearing me screaming. She tries to grab me. She tries to put me in a bear hug and whispers for me to be quiet, but I'm freaking out. Then the room starts spinning and I'm hyperventilating. At that moment, a nurse walks in. She sees the hysterics I'm in, and her and my mum bring in a wheelchair. They put me in the wheelchair, and as I'm being rolled away, I'm still looking at the mum and daughter, and shaking from fear. I couldn't even tell you if they were laughing or crying at this point, and just remembering it makes my heart beat like crazy. Now, my mum's pushing me on the wheelchair inside the elevator, when I hear a ding and the doors open. I get this quick sense that I've been here before, trying to focus and being pushed down a long hallway, then into a little room, and I suddenly start to remember my dream. I'm laying on top of the bed, barely breathing in a brown paper bag. My mum's sitting in the chair beside me crying, and that's when the same nurse is at the foot of my bed scornfully saying, "If she doesn't pace her breathing, she's going to die." She then turns around, walks out the door, slamming it right behind her, and I quickly snap out of whatever was a hold of me. When I look towards my mum, I grab her hand and say, "Don't worry, Mama, I'm gonna be okay." I take a deep breath and try to relax and start to breathe normally. Now this could have been where it ended, only in my dream. 4 years later though, it did end here, and I died. And that crazy nurse wasn't there either. She was only in my dream. My grandma, who was a Catholic, prayed and believed in saints, and had lots of colourful rosaries that were placed in her Santo statues. I would often wear these rosaries with a cute tank top and dicky slacks, especially when I would go out, and I was 18 when Grandma died. When I dream about her, they feel so real, and I wake up crying because I truly can't tell if she's passed or if I'm going to see her later. But I know she's watching over me. I was in line at the grocery store. I had mine and hers favorite pink rosary on when I noticed an older woman looking at me. She's dressed in black, has dark wavy hair, and she's wearing dark sunglasses. So I stare back, but from the corner of my eye, when suddenly the rosaries I was wearing burst on the ground into a million pieces. I mean, every bead was on the ground. The lady and I made eye contact, and in a hurry she walked away. As I was trying to pick up the beads, I saw her walk, then disappear into the crowd. Embarrassed, I quickly scooped up what I could find and tried to look up for this lady. Why? Because this lady looked exactly like the girl's mum who was in the hospital where my grandma died, and who I could call the witch in my dream. One particular plain evening, I was visiting my grandparents with my family. My grandparents lived in what I could accurately describe as being the middle of nowhere, a little cattle ranch near Moses Lake, Washington, their nearest neighbor, roughly 3 miles away. I was a young boy at the time, interested in video games and fantastic adventures, and as I was laying, drifting off to sleep next to my brother, my thoughts fantasized about being akin to a certain hero of a game I had been enjoying. At some point I was somewhere between awake and asleep, a state I think others might call lucid dreaming. I remember the dream clearly. I was in a dark forest hunting monsters, beasts like werewolves, and as I stood over the corpse of a freshly toppled foe, I looked up at a full moon, and a loud bell rang out, and a voice intoned, "Lucifer." I don't know why, but this brought me panic. I tried to quiet the noise but failed, and the bell and voice rang out again. And suddenly I was awake. I was on the floor of my grandparents' living room, laying next to me my brother, who was sleeping deeply. We were not alone. There was a presence behind me. I could not turn to face it. It radiated terror that I have never felt. I could feel its tension on me. It knew I was awake, and it observed me. It felt as if there was a pressure like a wind from a large 3-bladed fan turning. I hadn't the strength to poke my brother and hope he would rouse. I curled into a ball and prayed, though I'm not particularly religious, and the more I prayed and begged for deliverance, the more it tried to invade me. After what could have been hours or minutes, it left in a flash, pausing in my grandparents' room on its departure. I was awake and full of adrenaline, and did not manage to fall back asleep. In the morning, the rest of my family seemed to have all had an uneventful night. The full moon from my dreams seemed to overlap with the street lamp. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. It would certainly mean a hell of a lot to me if you would drop a like, leave a comment, and if you made it to the end of the video and are not subscribed, what are you doing? Subscribe. It's free and just one button. I do post every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday with fresh content for your listening pleasure. And it would mean a lot if you could join the Mortis Media family. So today is Tuesday, and on Thursday I've got another cool story for you. Well, stories. It's a pretty fun video. I hope you like it. And for those of you who have downloaded the app already, tell your friends in the comments, what you think of it. We've already got over 1,000 downloads, which is good. And it'd be good if we can get a few more. And just get some more feedback on it. That is really appreciated. We actually made a few changes a while ago, a history tab, which I think has been received fairly well. But yeah, I just need feedback and comments and stuff about how we're doing. It really, really helps out. I think I'll wrap it up here. A huge thank you, as always, to my members and patrons who help financially with the running of the channel, as, you know, it's really important and it really helps. Your donations and contributions go a long way, and you get loads of perks for doing so, and, you know, the names on screen are the people who help me out. I am so grateful for you guys. Thank you. I think I'm going to wrap things up here, guys. Stay awesome. See you on Thursday. Can't wait to see you there.